Hello guys, welcome to another segment of Mo and
Ali
in the morning. Okay, so today's topic of discussion is boundaries within the movies The Kite and Omar. So we're going to be discussing the theme of boundaries within the two movies.
I hope you enjoy the show.
Alright, so our next guest here is Wiam Akil. He took the class before, he has a little knowledge and background about the movies we're discussing today. So how does it feel to be discussing Arabic cinema again?
Good. After I took the class with Professor May, you start to realize the way certain things are shot actually have a more substantial meaning than what you first see it. It offers you a different perspective about how you view cinema. So it was definitely a class I took.
So I have a question for you regarding the movie Omar. How does boundaries exist throughout the movie?
The one that comes to mind right away is the easiest boundary within the emotional boundaries that Omar faces throughout the movie.
Yeah.
I think that's actually the most substantial boundary in the movie. Once you actually delve into it and you see that the biggest hurdle for him wasn't the wall that he crossed, but it was the emotional encounters that he faced throughout the movie.
تحبيني حب حدا تاني احكيلي
قصدك براد بيت.
I noticed a lot in the movie that the relationship between Omar and Nadia was very secretive, and
So that's a religious boundary.
the religious boundary. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
In the Islamic world, you're not supposed to.
Well, actually, I wouldn't characterize it more so as a religious boundary. It's about more so as a cultural boundary for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that speaking of that, it's the Palestinian culture, but also the whole nature of the movie being in a set occupation.
Yeah.
So there's this level of limitation already existing within the movie. In the context of Omar being in a setting of the Palestinian occupation, you see that the boundary between him and Nadia also is not so much I think. The easiest and the smallest boundary is actually the wall built between them. It's actually, like you mentioned, the cultural barriers and the fact that it's residing in a place of already distrust or a level of. It's a serious setting. It's not a setting fit for or prone to love and romance. It's a setting it's a political movement, right? His character is a leader of a political movement, so you got to take that into consideration as one of the boundaries restricting his relationship beyond the cultural and the physical boundaries of the wall.
Because the wall is just a rope, he already has his problem solved. He just climbs the rope, he's over the wall. With the woman, of course, the woman he loves, he has his brother, he has to ask him for his permission, he has the cultural boundaries, they can't meet up in public, they can't see each other when they want, and there's other boundaries around that as well. So another aspect of boundaries that we see in the film is a tremendous political boundary. Because the wall is just a physical boundary that represents the political boundary.
Exactly. No, I agree. So that was a tough one too, because that boundary is what more or less almost trying to break. He's fighting for a movement, insofar as he can achieve the Palestinian independence. So that one I think is the one that he already notices. It's the boundary that Omar is seeking to break himself. We mentioned the cultural boundaries and the religious boundaries, but that's the one that he actually he puts on his vision board that he wants to break. So that one's obviously a very successful one as well. When you see the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, you always see on the headlines a very brutal, vicious, and it is. I mean, if you see the ending of the movie and throughout the time movie, you see this level of violence. But like you mentioned, it also puts a name to these people, and it humanizes the conflict, makes it more real, and develops a level of consciousness for the complexity of the struggle. So.
No, I agree with that.
So it kind of breaks a cultural boundary between the Israelis and the Palestinians. They were both viewed as people who couldn't necessarily relate to each other. I feel like when he was in Agent Rumy's office, he kind of calmed down when he realized he was talking to his wife on the phone and they were having family issues at home. So he probably thought to himself, there isn't that much of a difference between both of us.
I think Hani Abu Asad, which is
The director.
director of the movie. I think he did that purposely. He showed that there's common ground.
Mhm.
You know, despite the level of differences for these two people, there's this level of humanity that still exists, despite the struggle, despite the circumstances,
Despite the cultural boundaries.
and more than just culture, the political boundaries. You know, the history that goes along with this movie and this conflict.
So we have Amira Rohe here to discuss the theme of boundaries within the movie The Kite. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
First off, can you give us a little summary of The Kite?
The Kite is a movie about a girl who's in the Druze community in Lebanon, and she has to get married to a guy living in Israel.
Across the border.
Yeah, across the border between the two countries. And because of the political situation between the two countries, it's like really emphasized how she has to actually cross the border between the two countries. And that's pretty much what the movie revolves around, is her getting married and the struggles she has to go through to leave her family. And then added to the plot is that she falls in love with a Lebanese guy who is working for the Israeli army, or the Israeli
Border
army.
watch, yeah.
Yeah, so she's in love with him and he's in love with her, but they can't really have the relationship that they want to have for obvious reasons because of, like I mentioned, the political situation between the two countries.
All right, based off what you said, we can clearly indicate a few themes of boundaries within just a summary of the movie. Okay, so does anything come to mind when you hear the word boundaries?
Yeah, I think physical boundaries are really important in the movie because, like I mentioned, she has to actually cross the distance, the actual boundary
So the
itself.
border. So we can relate the physical boundaries to the physical boundaries in Omar, where he has to cross over the wall, and that's overly dramatized as well.
Correct, yeah.
The huge scene giving us a perspective of how important it is and how important it is in the context of that culture. You know what I mean? So that boundary that she has to cross the border is a very important scene, obviously, for obvious reasons. It just shows that there's huge political boundaries in the movie, and it's, like you said, it's overemphasized. They film the entire walk with no music, it's just pure silence.
The sound of her walking, you just hear like her footsteps and the wind, and her dress gets caught in the barbed wire, so that's extra like.
In terms of boundaries, when you think of cultural, what comes to mind?
Cultural boundaries in the movie.
Yeah.
I think another boundary that the main character Lamia experiences is, like I mentioned, how she falls in love with Yusuf, which is the Israeli soldier. She can't have a relationship with him, but not only because of culture, it's also more so like a political issue that she can't have a relationship with him, because at the end of the day, they both technically have the same culture because they're both Lebanese, but he works for the Israeli army. So that was definitely a boundary, or I would say it's more a political issue that she's from Lebanon, and clearly the situation between both countries is, it's always been a conflict. So for obvious reasons, she can't be with him, he can't be with her. And it's even emphasized in the movie because the other Israeli soldier who works with Yusuf tells him, when he sees him spying on Lamia with his binoculars, he tells him, like, forget her, like you're chasing something you'll never get. Because other people in their surroundings also acknowledge the fact that although there's nothing really wrong with them being together, because of the overall picture, they can't. be together.
And what I also realized watching the movie, there isn't just political boundaries and physical boundaries. There's also within the cultural boundaries, like women don't have a choice. Like she wasn't asked if she wanted to marry the guy. She was just expected to accept her fate and
Yeah.
just cross that physical boundary and change her life forever. Leave her friends, family, her brother back at home.
And she's the one leaving her family behind. She's the one making that sacrifice when he's living the same life with his family still, and just basically the only thing changing in his life, I'm talking about the groom, is like his wife is gonna enter his life.
But it's an expectation for them to follow the social norms and not
Yeah.
exceed their boundaries.
Yeah.
And also what I noticed is it has a toll on the way someone acts. So she'd feel uncomfortable even interacting with a person of another gender. Like there was a scene where even after they were married, she was in her bedroom and the guy walked in and he was shirtless, her husband. And she felt very, very uncomfortable even after they were married because of the toll of the cultural boundaries that had on her. She hasn't experienced being that close with a half-naked man before.
I feel like although boundaries is what got Namia in the position that she was in terms of having to marry that guy who lives in Israel, she also in a way like overcame those boundaries by deciding to go back, no matter the like cultural consequences and how bad that would make her look.
So boundaries aren't necessarily something that you can't break through. It's just that there's always going to be consequences and there's going to be a different perspective that people have on you after you do exceed those boundaries. And at the same time, in the movie, she still doesn't get what she wants. Although she goes back to her hometown, she's still fantasizing about being with Yusuf, even though it's known that it's never going to happen. The dream she had, the interaction, it's what she wants, but because of the cultural, religious,
Political.
and even the physical boundaries, it's something that can't manifest itself in real life.
شو بدك؟
بدي إياك تكون معي. بدي تبطل تخاف. أنا بطلت خاف من زمان، لأن عارفة رح موت، أو يمكن هلأ أنا ميتة. بدي فيك زرار القميص هيك. بدي هيدي النجمة. بدي تشلح الصباط، خصوصا صباطك.